1983, the Swiss watch industry was dying, not slowing down, not taking a pause, not, oh, we had a bad quarter. Straight up dying. Quartz watches from Japan were gutting the Swiss watch industry, and employment, that entire world was, they were hanging on by a thread. The banks were getting ready to sell whatever was left, basically just for parts. The man that brought in the refreshment, the enthusiasm, the grab him by the face mask and tell him to get back up. We know you're down by 30 and it's the fourth quarter, but let's do this. It was a Lebanese born consultant named Nicholas Hayek. And again, instead of running the liquidation play, basically bet everything on plastic, which it's horrifying if you're thinking about it. In retrospect, maybe a brilliant idea. It was brilliant. But back then, this is insanity. So let's bet it on a plastic watch with 51 components and let's weld that case shut. Look, you couldn't open a Swatch watch. That was the entire point. No case back to remove, no movement to clean, no parts catalog to order from. When it wore out, you chucked it and you bought another one. It was the first intentionally disposable Swiss watch. The part that makes me uncomfortable is that this actually worked. The disposable watch generated the money that saved Omega and Longines and Blancpain, and it built an empire that we now call the Swatch Group. So when a listener wrote to me and said he refuses to buy a modern Swatch Group watch because the movements have become, quote, disposable, I couldn't just wave that away because if this is true, it would not be a scandal. It would be the founding of the entire company, coming back around on the mechanical side of the catalog. All right. I'm interested to get into this one. This is going to be a bonus episode. This is what's on your restate. I'm Wachowski, and today we're talking about, I'm going to call this the grandfather's axe. Let's get into it. All right, today's bonus episode exists because because of a listener sent in a pretty awesome message, and I want to read it to you, lightly edited for the air. Okay, so it starts, and I'm going to open quote, and until I say close quote, I'm reading the message. Okay, open quote. The Powermatic 80 family are essentially unserviceable away from the factory, and reputedly, actually just re- well, they actually just replace the movements at service time. I'm not certain whether this is true or not. The 80 supposedly can be swapped one for one with any 2824 or clone, but then the watch is not original. Heck, if they swap the movement at the factory, then do you have the original movement either? This makes me basically refuse to buy any modern Swatch Group watch. I just cannot bring myself to do it. I want to be able to pass watches down to my son, and passing down a watch that has a disposable movement seems insane. I'm curious what your feeling is here. This is one of those things where all of my friends think I'm being silly. Close quote. All right. First, you're not being silly. You have put your finger, I think, on one of the biggest unspoken shifts, I think, in modern watchmaking. And part of the reason your friends think you're being silly is that the industry has been very careful, I don't think, to talk about this. So let's talk about it. And I had to do some homework on this because I have my bias and opinions as well. Let's talk about what really is inside of a Powermatic 80. There are different variants, of course, right? But what also happens at service time? And again, the big one, and the big question is going to be, what does it even mean as when we say something original? So what are we truly passing down to our kids, for example? So let's talk about what's actually in a Powermatic 80. So in 2012, Tissot introduced the Powermatic 80, to my knowledge. And basically, since then, this has become the workhorse of basically the entire, I would say, mid-tier lower of the Swatch Group catalog. So Tissot, Certina, Mido, Hamilton, some aspects of Rado, they're all over the place. And under the hood, they're basically built on the bones of what the ETA 2824 is. That's correct. And it's a movement architecture from the, I think, late 1970s, and it's arguably, I would say, one of the most successful automatic calibers ever made. Engineers in the Powermatic 80, they slow down the balance and they take it down from like 8 beats per second to about 6. And they redesigned the barrel with this longer but also thinner mainspring, and they reworked the gear train and they made it much more efficient. And the result is you get 80 hours of power reserve instead of roughly 40. So they double it. Like you take it off on the Friday, it's running on the Monday, which is awesome. What you get instead, the trade-off for that is that you get a little bit more of a noticeable tick in those in the seconds hand. And so then comes some like interesting choices. Like there's no traditional regulator on this movement. So like when you flip open Solita, for example, and you open up an SW200 or whatever, there's a little spot that you can take your tiny little screwdriver and you can regulate it. You can speed it up or slow it down. Some of the older pocket watches of like, if you look at like the old ETA base calibers, right? You can literally just push a little lever and it will speed up or slow down. It will accelerate or retard, right, to slow. It'll slow the movement down, and then you can speed up or slow down your watch, right? And it'll say A or R on the back of the watch, right? But again, there's no traditional regulator on this thing. So it's basically the rate gets set by a factory, really by a machine, and then fine adjustment happens through these little weights on the balance itself. Now, before anyone emails me, yes, a competent watchmaker can regulate one. That myth is going to die hopefully today. But it's not like the 5-minute tweak that we could do or my grandfather could do or any watchmaker could do with like a screwdriver and a squint or a right, or their watchmaker's loop, right? The movement comes in multiple flavors, but again, you're moving things that are more difficult and much more easy to mess up, okay? The entry version and most of the Tissot's and even some of the Certinas now have this pallet fork and an escape wheel, and typically they're made of like a synthetic polymer. You can call it plastic if you want. The engineers would say composite, and they would point out that it's, look, you're getting a trade-off, right? Yeah, it's polymer, but it's also anti-magnetic. It's very low friction and it needs less lubricants than steel. And so in the mid tier though, when you get up into like Mido and Rado, and this isn't for all of them, like some levels of Certina will use some of the movements and you'll notice that they'll have little dots or letters or numbers after the Powermatic sequence. And so you'll notice that there's different levels. So don't just assume like, oh, it's a Tissot or oh, it's a Certina and it doesn't have one of these. It may or may not. So a lot of times they'll give them a nicer movement and then they'll kind of move around. So some Certinas, for example, will have the movements that I'm talking about that are in Mido or Rado and so on. So don't think that these are all be all end all hard lines because they do get a little squirrely as well. Now, it is interesting what Swatch Group is doing because they're slowly pushing down some of the more polymer ones down to their lower tiers, and then they're pushing up to build up some of their mid-tier and brands and above. So, okay, so back to Mido and Rado. They they have metal escapements typically, and they add also this balance spring. They call it Nivachron, and it's basically an anti-magnetic alloy. And again, they also have these top versions that can get a silicon balance spring, and they can get chronometer certified. And you can see them sometimes even in like the Tissot Gentleman, where owners are reporting accuracy that really embarrasses watches that are costing like 20 times more. So don't assume that all of them are the same. You have to know your specific model and then also specifically what what movement is in that specific watch. So it gets a little bit messy. So honestly, engineering answer, the Powermatic 80 is not junk. It is a workhorse. It is a very reliable movement. I've had multiple watches with those movements in them. They're accurate, they're robust, they shrug off magnets, and I think they run you through a long weekend and you're great. It's a machine, I think, for telling time, and it may be, again, the best value in Swiss watchmaking. But our listener isn't asking whether it's a good machine. He probably is assuming, yeah, it is a good machine. What he's asking though is this a machine with a future? So, which is going to bring us to section 2, which I think is the surface question. So, here's what we know for certain, and I've reached out to watchmakers. I have multiple watchmakers. I've reached out to folks with certifications with Omega, which means that they're also certified to work on some of these other watches. And I've reached out to independents, and so I've gotten multiple answers. And so I'm going to share with you as much as I can. Okay. What we know for certain is that parts are locked up. And what that means is that around a decade ago, the Swatch Group finished they basically cut off spare parts supply to independent watchmakers. And so what does this mean? That means that if you're a local watchmaker, right, my guy down the street that I love, and he doesn't hold an authorized parts account with Swatch Group, they're not legally allowed to buy Powermatic escape wheels or the polymer versions or even anything specialized with regard to synthetic lubricants. It's all restricted. And so basically, what ends up happening is that a lot of independent watchmakers will basically decline the job, either one on principle, because they're like, well, one, I'm not certified or authorized to be able to purchase these things. So they tell you, this watch is junk. I can't service this, blah, 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 blah. And then they send it back to you, right? And they say, you have to send it back to the factory, right? And that's because of their limitations of what they have. Now, some folks do have parts. Some folks do have lifted restrictions because they can work on those watches. So when a listener says that these movements are essentially unserviceable away from the factory, that is technically close to true in practice. Okay. Now, I'm not an attorney here. And it's not because the movement cannot be taken apart. Look, it can. There's videos online of watchmakers doing full teardowns of this, which I watched. It is unserviceable in practice because the parts pipeline only flows really in one direction, and that direction is to the factory. Okay. Now, what is strongly reported but is not official is a straight up movement swap. Now, a watchmaker who used to work at the Swatch Group service center in the US basically has said plainly that for entry grade calibers, it's much cheaper to drop in a fresh movement than to pay a skilled human hours of teardown, cleaning, and reassembly. These movements are largely assembled by a machine anyhow, and a new one costs the factory far less than a watchmaker's afternoon. But in return for that, you get some bonuses as well. So the removed movement basically goes back into a refurbishment pool rather than the trash bin. And then Swatch has never technically published this, so you don't hold me to it. And Swatch Group, please don't sue me, because basically what I'm saying is that you haven't published it, and this is basically on accounts of what other people have said. I'm just reporting it, nor am I saying that it's fact. So to be fair to them, factory service is genuinely expensive, right? In the US, it's somewhere around the price of a good independent watch. And so a good independent service can be a little bit less, but again, very expensive. So is the rumor true? Almost certainly, at least much of the time, I would say at the entry level, yes. They're taking the movement out, they're swapping it in, they're popping in a new one. Is it confirmed? No. And I want to be careful with this line because it doesn't, I don't want to continue to push this laundered rumor mill into fact. I don't know if it's true or not, and I can't get a straight answer. But one thing that I think the listener got right is that the Powermatic shares its footprint with the 2824 family. So, yes, technically, you could drop in a classic ETA or ETA clone or a clone or any of those modern kinds of watches, and you could drop that movement in. Now, which if you think about it, is exactly why replacing the whole movement is so easy for the factory to do as well. Like a very the very compatibility of that gives you an escape hatch is what makes the cartridge model kind of work. And for the record, like a truly sealed watch, it does exist. It's not the Powermatic 80, however, it's a System 51. Like the Swatch Group watch that you can get in like the Blancpain/Swatch collaboration in the System 51, but you can also just get it a Swatch watch for with the System 51. It's 51 parts. The entire thing is assembled by a machine and it's sealed shut. That one is, I think, the spiritual heir to what they did in like 1983 for Swatch, but I would say that the Powermatic sits somewhere in between that space. Like it's a real, and it is a repairable mechanical movement, but it's swapped in a supply chain that treats it like a cartridge, okay? Now, the plot twist, I would say that here's the part that kind of reframes this whole question. Look, if servicing or exchanging servicing disqualifies a watch from being an heirloom, we have a much bigger problem than Tissot because the practice goes actually way up market as well. Like Tudor, for example, the brand that every enthusiast seems to recommend with like sensible heirloom buy, right? Since 2015, I think they built their flagship around watches with in-house calibers from this movement company, which is Kinesi, and they have been widely reported, including by watchmakers actually inside Rolex service centers, that when an in-house tutor comes in needing anything beyond a regulation, the movement is exchanged for a refurbished unit. And so your movement goes back into the pool. it gets rebuilt, and then it gets shipped out and it goes into somebody else's watch. Now, Tudor has never published this either. So again, the Rolex Foundation, right? And Tudor and Canisi, don't come after me because I'm not saying that this is true. I'm just saying this is what I found in spaces online from people that have reported this from Rolex service centers. They might be just telling fibs. I don't know. But they've also had some owners describing being offered a choice of this, right? You can take the exchange movement and get the watch back faster, or you can insist on keeping your own movement and wait longer and then also pay possibly a higher service fee because you're actually having your movement disassembled and then, repaired, cleaned, and then put back together. And here's my favorite detail, right? The older ETA-based Tudors, the ones running the humble 2824 architecture, those reportedly still get like a traditional service, which is wild to me. So, one owner actually documented this. His watchmaker photographed the movement before it went in, and the watch went in, got service, and then came back, and it was the same movement, which was properly rebuilt and then running beautifully. So sit with this for a second. The prestigious in-house caliber, right? The highest, the most modern one gets swapped like a printer cartridge, and the old workhouse gets like the white glove teardown. And Seiko reportedly does the same thing with its entry mechanical calibers as well. So send one in and you're very likely to just get a swapped exchange movement inside. So this is not just like Swatch Group cutting corners. I think this is how the modern industry services industrial movements from like $300 Tissot to like a $4,000 Tudor. And our listener, I think, is drawing his line around one corporation, but the practice, I think, doesn't respect that line. It goes through all of these other companies. Now, what's fascinating to me is because if you go a little bit further based on what my listener is asking, then if we get into brands like Sellita, for example, or Soprod, or Miyota, this is fascinating because what you've got here is now you're saying, look, these brands, they are widely open to be able to sell their parts to any watchmaker on the planet. Now, this is the curveball that I don't think anybody expected. What if, hypothetically, all of these micro brands that are all using Sellita and Miyota and Soprod movements all have serviceability, all can get parts? In 15 or 20 or 30 years, you can go onto eBay and get a brand new, in stock, right, SW200 mainspring. And you can go and put that into your own watch and regulate your own watch and get all of the parts that you need. For a full teardown, you can get all the lubricants that you need. Which one is the one that you want to pass down? And I think that is such a curveball from what anybody expected to be able to happen. And that's kind of what's happening right now. Now, I'm going to get into the next part. I'm going to call this my grandfather's clock / grandfather's axe. So, which is going to bring us to this old folk parable. It's a paradox, really. If you've ever heard this story, the grandfather's axe, right? It's a farmer. They basically show you, or imagine you walk into their home and they show you this axe hanging over their fireplace, and then someone comes in and says, "Hey, that was my grandfather's axe," and you're like, "Whoa, that's pretty cool, right?" Imagine the stories that axe could tell, right? And then they kind of, they have a couple of drinks and they say, well, of course, the handle though, it's been replaced 3 times, you know, and an axe really has like what, 2 parts, right? It has the handle and it has the actual axe part. Now, but again, this is grandfather's axe hanging there, right? The stories it could tell, but the handle has been replaced 3 times, right? The most recent replacement was probably 35 years ago, but no. It's a 150-year-old axe. And, the head of it, that's been replaced twice, of course, because it got worn out. So, but the head, I think, the head is at least 60 years old. And you're like, okay. But no, this is grandfather's axe. And is it? Is it actually grandfather's axe, or has it just been replaced so many times, right? You have to think about what this actually is, because you have a third now handle and you have a second head on this axe, right? And the Greeks, they have actually a fancier version of this when I was doing a little homework on trying to find my analogy here. Plutarch wrote about the ship of Theseus, and he kept it in the harbor at Athens, and they basically started to repair these boats plank by plank. And the philosophers were arguing back and forth whether any of the ship was original, right? This is why I bring it up. The heirloom watch is basically the grandfather's axe, kind of broken down into like its simplest form. So take a beloved vintage watch from like the 1960s. Maybe it's been properly serviced every 5 years, okay? That's a dozen services by now. Along the way, it has almost certainly received new mainsprings, new gaskets, a crystal or two, possibly a crown, maybe a balance. Maybe after a hard drop, it got an entire balance staff replaced. Maybe a set of hands had to get replaced as well. If we're being real honest with each other, an alarming number of vintage dials out there, they've all been refinished, right? Ask any serious vintage collector. Truly all original is like the rarest thing in the entire hobby. Like half of the claims cannot survive under a loop. We know this because the highest auction, the most well respected auction houses in the world have been caught with their pants down with selling watches that were not original, right? Now, try this experiment, courtesy of a collector I ran across while researching this episode. Imagine a vintage watch had its entire movement exchange under warranty in its first year back in 1965 and then stayed untouched for 60 years. Is that watch original? Almost everyone would say yes. So originality was never about the atoms? What we love in an heirloom is the story, the continuity of story. And the watch that's on your wrist at a wedding, the watch that your father checked at every one of your ball games, the case is going to collect scars, and the dial is going to fade in the sun, and those parts your son will actually recognize: the case, the dial, the hands. But, and this is a big but, I don't think our listener is wrong here. There is a real difference between a part replaced by a craftsman who judged it worn and the whole mechanism being replaced by a policy because human labor costs more than the machine output. I think the first one is repair. It's a person paying attention to your specific watch. And the second one is logistics. And when the part supply is locked so that the only a factory can even do that, I think something is being lost here. What's been lost is the ability for your son, maybe 40 years from now, to walk into a small shop anywhere on earth and have a human being fix his father's watch. Now, for some of us, the ability is the entire point of a mechanical watch. If nobody can fix it but the factory, and the factory fixes it by exchanging it, you are entitled to ask whether that is still a mechanical watch in the way that what we mean it to be. Or is it a quartz ownership experience with a rotor? I don't know the answer to that. I will say that here's kind of where I think I land, but my answer may change tomorrow. Your feelings are legitimate. And notice that it was never really, your question was never really about specs. The question was about values, which is kind of what we talk about here. You've decided that repairability by human hands is part of what a watch is. And that's a coherent, I think, philosophy of ownership. And I don't think anybody should laugh you out of that. But I want to redraw your boundaries a little bit because you picked like, no modern Swatch Group that catches, I think, the wrong watches on both sides. It blocks, I think, running classic, fully serviceable architecture just because of the logo on the corporate letterhead. I think it waves through plenty of non-Swatch watches whose service model extends kind of the same exchange game, maybe with nicer packaging. And Tudor kind of proves this as well. So here's what I would suggest. Draw a line around the practice and not the corporation. If an heirloom repairability is the requirement, I think three things are going to satisfy this. One, movements with open supply parts. So Solita sells parts freely. We know this, which is why independent watchmakers, they smile when they open up a case back and they find Solita. Now, if you want your Solita serviced, tell them that, because if not, sometimes they will swap out your Solita for an entirely new Solita. And that's also something that you could do for yourself as well. Miyota, same thing. Their replacements, really for common calibers, they're going to exist for decades. Now, number two, makers who design for serviceability on purpose. Like, this show has spent tons of time on brands who desperately build around components that any watchmaker on earth can source. I think I have scheduled for season two or probably season three, maybe season two, Habring. And they're in Austria. And again, they build their movements so that any competent watchmaker can source the parts to repair it, which is brilliant, right? Even some of their in-house stuff. Because I think, you know, they they know how hard a watchmaker's life can be, and so they want their watches after they're gone to be able to be serviced. And that philosophy, I think, is the exact opposite of a sealed cartridge. And it's one of the reasons I think independent watchmaking matters. Now, 3, if you fall in love with a Powermatic powered design anyway, I would say buy it with clear eyes. Like the case, the dial, the bezel, the bracelet, with all of your kind of scratches in it, all of that stuff, all that's going to stay with you through every service forever. Now, the heart may be exchanged one day, but the story doesn't. The one story I wanted to weave in here, but I couldn't, was I had this sketch of, this idea of someone having a heart transplant, right? And, if this is your mother and they're getting a heart transplant and they come back out and their heart is someone else's heart, is that still your mom? Right? I would argue absolutely that's still your mom, but it's beating with someone else's heart. I couldn't sneak that story in, but I did wanna sneak it in here just because, but I had the whole crux of the narrative built around that, and I was like, "It just didn't work for me," but I think it fits here with in regard to Powermatic, for example. Now, again, the heart can be exchanged one day, but the story is the same. That's gonna be dad's watch. I've had the Certina that I had, for example, the DH or the DSPH 200M, right? Looks kind of like a Blanc Pawn, but they're kind of the vintagey blue with sword hands. Great watch, but just for me, 43 millimeters is a little bit pushing the edges, right? That would have been a great watch to pass down. It's sort of classic, but the size of it, I was just like, is my kid going to be able to rock a 43 millimeter someday, right? If it was in a 38 to 40, maybe, right? So just something to kind of think about. Now, but the movement for me was never a challenge. I was like, well, maybe the odds are they're probably not going to be a watchmaker, even though that might be cool. And so they're probably going to send it in for service anyhow, right? Now, one last thing from a guy who, again, wrote a book about what we actually want to hand down. Like, your son is not going to hand or inherit like a palette fork. He's going to inherit, I think, a memory of you checking your watch at hopefully his games or things that were significant in their life. And maybe in a photo that you've taken with them, right? And the day you finally let them wear it, right? You give them your watch to wear. If if the watch carrying that memory gets its movement swapped in 20 years for or 40 years or whatever, I think the memory still survives that swap. And I think the memory survives just fine, whatever engine's in there. But, but, if it matters to you that the mechanism itself is the one that was ticking through their childhood, then I would say honor that. That's a legacy. And who cares who's laughing at you? Because here's the thing, it's really strange. I don't care what other people think about the watch that's on my wrist. I tell stories about legacy and heirlooms and passing things down, right? And I sound completely insane to everyone else in the world except for a teeny tiny little group of people who kind of just get it. And my wife, for example, didn't get it. And now she gets it. She gets the fact that when we go and take our photos every year for Christmas cards or whatever, she goes, now she asks, which watch are you going to wear this year? And she kind of gets it. She kind of gets it. Oh, you're going to wear his watch, right? And she knows my son's watch. You're going to wear his watch today, right? In these pictures. She understands. But your friends that aren't in this space, it's kind of like asking Reddit, which one looks better, bro? Who cares what other people think? We care because we care about what we want to be remembered by. And I think your question was a beautiful way of asking that. So I would say buy the watch a human being cares to repair. I think you can look at that and you can look at your legacy, but I think it's going to matter of getting the watch that they're going to want to repair, meaning whatever you wore, whatever dad wore, they're gonna wanna repair it. My dad wore a $12 Armatron. I spent tons of money, more than the $12 Armatron was worth, to get that watch repaired. Why? Because it was important for me to get that thing up and running, right? To reach out to brands and to go find parts for a $12 Armatron. It's got a different module in it. It's got a different little screen on it. It's my dad's watch. And so I would say that both of these answers can be right. I think you're gonna be the only one that's gonna be able to answer that question. But I appreciate the question. Now, let's kind of wrap this thing up. Swatch Group in 1983, right? Throwing out these disposables on purpose, but they saved an entire industry. Powermatic, the idea that, wearing a mechanical watch is wonderful. Putting in Swiss automatics is awesome, even for folks that couldn't afford them at the time. I don't think that that's nothing, right? It's pretty significant. But then we have to remember the grandfather's axe analogy, right? The idea of the analogy and the axe itself means something, even if people have fixed it, and even if they've repaired it, and even if they've taken parts out. Mom with the replaced heart, right? It's still mom. All right. Thanks for this listener for one of the best letters I think I've gotten in a while. This is pretty cool. All right. Tell your friends that they're being silly. Tell them to shut up. I'm just kidding. Just don't tell them to shut up. Yeah. Have them take it up with the podcast. All right. Tell them that you are now a philosopher and they don't understand who you are. All right. I'm Wachowski. Wear something good. Thanks for the post on this one. I appreciate it. It was fun to do homework. All right. Later.
We're